submission points. We have provided our draft submission to ECAN at present, just to help them through, to help start their process of figuring out all the feedback. We are able to give them additional feedback this week, and so this is this workshop here is to help us through the bits that you've talked to us about previously, and to make sure that our comments back to ECAN are reflecting what you're hoping for, or what or you needing us to add a bit more here. And after this briefing, we'll update the submission to ECAN and update the sign off of that submission for next week as well. So we'll just, I think we've picked up the key points here on the key provisions here that we've talked about over the last month, and we'll just run through the commentary we've provided, and it'll be great to get your direction on if that's strong enough, or we want to be, or how, or not, or be weak enough, or however you want to approach that. It'd be awesome. So that's as much as I know. So I'm going to ask Rachel to help us lead us through our commentary here.
I guess I'm going to need the laptop.
I can. Do you want me to type, or you just want me to just sit?
Well, you're the one who can read the screen.
Oh, you can't read it? All right. All right, I'm out. I'm up. Swap around. Gold medal.
Do you want to fill the screen more with the actual document?
I don't know if we can.
Okay.
Kylie, is there a way to make that more on the screen there? It's, yeah.
Remind the agenda of this.
1 o'clock. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, so that all that figure here. So we'll just work through specific ones of those. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got all 60 something pages of our detailed feedback, and it's like we actually don't need to talk to you about where we've identified commas missing and semicolons and colons and that kind of stuff. So we've been through and picked out probably the 5 key issues that we just want to make sure that we've accurately captured your thinking. And if we haven't, please tell us so that we can accurately capture your thinking. So the first one is around the residential density targets within Greater Christchurch. So this would be applying in West Melton, Rolleston, Lincoln, Prebbleton. Yeah, I think that's all of them. I was mentally going through the others, but they're settlement zones, so they're not so worried. So we currently have a density target of 15 households per hectare. The draft RPS is proposing that we're looking for 25 households per hectare. The difficulty that we're having at the staff level is that we talk about 15 sites per hectare, but because we're talking about communities where you can have 3 houses on each site. So 15 sites per hectare becomes 45, potentially 45 households per hectare. And so 25 times 3, that's the potential for 75 houses per hectare. And so we've got some questions for ECAN around what is it you're actually trying to achieve so that we can word it accordingly.
Yeah, so if we take it as we're going from 15, the old kind of idea of 15 to 25, I think at the ECAN presentation, they talked about staging that over time, or how we thought about that. So we've outlined that a staged approach would be worth considering, but it'd be interesting to know. Be great to hear your thoughts on how you feel that would go if we did a abrupt change to 25, or we kind of push that over time, or I don't know if we need to be stronger there or not.
Okay, I'll start.
You go, Deborah.
Interesting with regards to the medium density standards being applied in Christchurch. given that they are looking at a model where it's not blanket across the whole of their area. It is only in certain service areas with accessibility to transport, etc. Are we planning as part of the Greater Christchurch area to actually follow their philosophy? And how's that going to feed back through to the district, through to the regional policy statement when it's a strategic across the board? So I'd like to understand the different methodologies.
That's probably more related to the intensification target that's is in there as well, around aiming for 50 to 100 in those areas where that would be the rezoning space around that. The city's one around the centres was going beyond the permitted standard of MDRS and following what was required in the national policy statement around the centres. When we did our MDRS, we said that Rolleston was not at that scale where going beyond three stories was needed for now. And we've still got to wait to see what happens with what the city has proposed versus what the recommendation out of that. So we'll continue to watch that. But yeah, so the question you're asking is around maybe the 50 or the 100 in the town centres in Rolleston and the impact of that. In our feedback here, we've talked about how that is potentially unrealistic, and potentially by requiring that high amount, it could undermine the development of the town centre and surrounds. And so we need to make sure that it's probably done in an appropriate manner. So yeah, is that strong enough, or you want us to kind of come out better than that?
I think it's, is it worth looking at the terminology? The moment we're talking houses per hectare, what about calling it individual dwellings per hectare? Because at the moment, houses per hectare, as you say, you could have 3 on one site, whereas dwellings, individual dwellings would perhaps be a way of getting through that.
Yeah, and then so how many dwellings would be kind of happy within greenfield areas or an intensification, and that kind of change from at the moment where it's maybe 1 per or 15 houses or dwellings per hectare, where it's pushing up to 25. But in our centres, it could be 50 to 100, 150 kind of space, which is getting up to that 6-story level. Yeah. How do we kind of signal back here that could happen over time, or not right now, or that's the question we need to sort of get strong on that, or get your feel on so. This is what we need that policy statement to point out to us now. It needs to signal this higher number, and we'll figure out a way to get there. Or
yeah.
I have
one more from you, Deborah, then Grant.
And I don't know whether you're going to cover this or not, but it's on page 85 of Diligent with you've amended to read with regards to LF rural, which is lifestyle. You've called lifestyle and rural residential development. LFRLP 41A. It's around rural residential. Why is rural residential development not recognised within this policy? Elsewhere, rural lifestyle and rural residential have been used together, but not in this policy. Is there an oversight? Yeah. Clarify that only rezoning of highly productive land for low density residential development is to be avoided, leaving scope for this land to be rezoned for other urban activities. Noting concerns about inclusion of density of definition of urban activities. With regards to, I guess, the definition of what people term as rural lifestyle, and I'm just concerned that people will say 4 hectares is a lifestyle block, and that's the terminology that they used to use in. Through our district plan, we actually got a legal opinion that was input into our district plan that 4 hectares is a farming unit. And I think that they just, that area of where we're actually sitting, and that legal opinion that played a major input into our district plan, rezonings, needs to be highlighted through to the regional council. And I could not see anything mentioned, with regards to their policy structure about what terminates a lifestyle block, rural residential, lifestyle. And the whole thing needs total clarification, right from the beginning to the end.
Okay, I've got your point.
Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Yeah, we've made, that's covered off in our overall comments at the beginning of the document around their use of planning standards descriptions as definitions. And there are some problems around that we've suggested that they address. That is exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, thank you for the clarification.
So I wonder if you just help me understand. So the proposal of 25 units per hectare, what does that look like on the ground? We were at Kevlar Homes this morning. Is that 25 homes per hectare? Is that what it looks like actually developed? Some sort of example?
Yeah, so it could be, ideally it would be a range, 25 hectares at 400.
It won't be 400, so is it? Because you've got to take the roads off. So I'm thinking it's
Yeah,
probably
yeah, so then
330, something like that.
Yeah, so I think what the evidence is when you get to the 20, you have to start doing attached typologies. You can't just keep squeezing to smaller standalones. So when you get to 25, at least you'll get 2 stories. So that means you can halve your floor area on the ground. So you can have a 50 square meter floor area on the ground with 50 square meters additional space around it, but have a 100 square meter house. So yeah, but the goal is that 25 would show, you'd have to start showing some attached typologies that you could then, if that might be higher than 25, and then you could have sites beyond that are lower than 25 to get an overall balance of 25.
I think that's the important thing I'm trying to understand, is that if we implement this rule, it won't be carte blanche that every single section in Selwyn is now going to be 320 square metres or 250 square metres. There'll be still a range of section sizes available. The developer will have to do some attached terrace housing to try and make space for those bigger sections to be in their development. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think the 15 or the 10, 12, 15 didn't actually quite achieve that. I think everyone just squeezed the sites to just a smaller version of the bigger thing, and we got that uniformity, but a high number should mean that you have to do variation, and we get that difference coming through. But yeah, well, so if that goes through, we'll have to sort of start to see how we implement that across our plans and where we want to signal attached typologies to occur and not. Yeah.
Not for today, but I'd like to support Deborah and I think at some stage we need to review our MDRS or intensification to have perhaps zones within Selwyn. Just a blanket application of Ralston, Lincoln, Preildon probably doesn't really work, to be honest.
Yeah, so the announcement from Minister Bishop on the Going for Housing Growth outlines that they are intending to develop legislation that will have a trigger in it for councils to decide whether to keep it or whether to amend it, and then go through the process of that. So we will, once we have the legislation in place, we know our timeframes and what our question is, we'll then come to you and say, do you want to keep this blanket thing, or is there alternative ones within that? But until we know what they're actually putting in front of us, we just need to sort of wait and see. Yeah.
At the moment, we're just waiting on our scope for ability to change so that we can then come talk to you about.
Yeah, don't know what you don't know.
Which bits do we keep? Which bits do we completely toss? Which bits do we tweak?
Thank you.
It kind of follows on from that. I just wanted to understand, and I know this, you might not have the answer for this, but what would that actually mean going forward when we're talking about MDRS in the Greater Christchurch for West Milton?
Currently, the MDRS didn't apply to West Milton because it didn't meet that standard, but that could be brought up within that scope when they say, hey, you can amend it, and then we'll figure out how we could do that. And it will be something that we could address in future Selwyn and the area plan work that we do. We need to start to think about what do we want to see happening in those towns and what the development could look like and not look like, and that that can kind of start to signal that too.
Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Epiha.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. I guess following on from that and that, given the information that we've just heard, are you confident that there's enough control of council to I guess when it is appropriate, when certain triggers are hit, that we still have enough control to mitigate development in the propensity that we have the infrastructure to support it? Yes. Okay. Just in some of the summary documents here, for succinctness, you've rangatiratanga and kaitiakitanga. Thank you very much for having a focus on Ngāi Tahu through the document and some of the wordings. Are you confident that by reducing some of that, the confusion and the overlap, we have enough documentation in there to still support Ngāi Tahu's rangatiratanga?
Yeah, the purpose of our, well, the thrust behind our comments has been actually around making sure that we don't accidentally stuff up Ngāi Tahu's development aspirations by putting something in there that's actually not going to work.
Okay, thank you. I'm here.
Kia ora, Sophie.
Yeah, mostly just a thank you from me. And I know you didn't want to go through all the grammar and the punctuation and everything and the definitions, but those are the bits that people are going to argue over later. So it's really good to see that, like, you know, okay, so you've used these words. What does it mean? Yeah, we need to know. So, and yeah, as the legislation changes, that's going to be even more, like, we don't want to have to go over and do this stuff again and again because somebody's handed down a judgment or whatever. So yeah, that's pretty much me, was the thank you. And it was interesting though today, the site visit we did this morning, like they're obviously very proud of their development and I love what we saw, but at the same time it's literally embedding the current way of doing things, standalone houses on small sections that will be there for at least another 50 years. So anyway, but this is great. Thank you.
Lydia.
Are we going through what you guys need feedback on, or do you just?
We did have a couple other ones to go over as well, if you wanted, but
Or do you just want our feedback directly, or are you working through the document?
Can we-
work through
yeah.
the document
Perfect.
and then we cover the stuff that we actually really need your feedback on. And then if there's stuff that we haven't covered, you give us the general. How does that sound?
Sounds like a great way to go. Lead on.
so just on the density numbers there, happy for us to sort of suggest that 25 is good and we'll a staged approach to that may be a better way to go, and 150 and or 150 in those town centre or other centres is okay as long as it doesn't start to undermine the ability for that area to actually develop. Is that that's good? Cool. We'll move on to our next topic.
Does that item 3 make sense though? 50 to 100 elsewhere. That's quite a catch-all, isn't it? Elsewhere. Where's elsewhere?
Yeah.
Anywhere in Greater Christchurch that's zoned urban.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
everything. Yeah.
So Greenfield in Rolleston, Lincoln, Prebbleton, 25 households per hectare. Infill in over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, 50 to
So-
100, please.
So brownfield.
Brownfield, yeah.
So it's clear.
Maybe should insert brownfield there.
Yeah, I think that elsewhere is probably not as clear as it could be. Yeah.
I'm pretty
I
sure
think we
there's-
did comment something like that.
we did comment somewhere about. What do you mean by elsewhere?
Yeah.
Right, lead on. I'm very interested to see if we're going to get to the airshed, but however.
So then the next one was around the development under the airport noise contours. And we'd noted that you seem to be fairly keen to support the continued ability of the airport to operate, but allow a level of development within those contours. Have we got the balance right in our comments? So if you look, that's EIT INFP 3, if you want to be looking at what's in your doc and diligent rather than what's on the screen. And then we also had a question for a drafting question for the ECAN team around, given the nature of aircraft noise, how do you practically design to protect outdoor living environments from that noise?
Sorry,
Sorry, what was that?
88.
Thank you.
So the current the draft proposed RPS talked about enabling more within the airport noise contour with some caveats, which is a shift from the current one, which is avoid those ones. So our comment there was to say the noise contour allows the airport to continue to operate. However, there's probably some development within that could occur outside that.
Yeah, I support that. I think, why can't you build a triple glazed house underneath it? It's ridiculous the way it's been operating. Nicole?
Have they looked at what Auckland's done? Like what limits they have under their flight paths and stuff? How have they
We
come up with the
We
rules?
haven't had the opportunity to look at their 32 reports yet because they're still writing their 32
Yeah,
reports
okay.
because this feedback feeds into their 32
Yeah.
reports.
So yeah.
Because it'd be interesting to know, because I've so they talk about here like try be the only 24-hour airport. Well, Auckland, I've looked up, actually operates pretty much 24 hours, but it does have the sea on one side, so it really depends on whether they are actually just coming in from that side or whether they are above. Got still coming across. So, and that leads on to, like we were talking about the outdoor areas. I mean, it was to what extent do you actually go to as well?
Yeah.
Because the outdoor area, I mean, just on the reserves, like you'll be on the large scale park, you're all right to be in that. So yeah.
And by the time aircraft get low enough that a fence or equivalent or buildings or whatever can block the noise from your activity, you're well outside the 50 and the 55 contours, and you're well into the area where we actually do want to be avoiding residential activity.
Yeah. And it's so just question because I mean, as you're well aware, I mean, this has been a bone of contention for many years. And I have, a few years ago, Annette Foster had told me about the process that they went through and stuff just to get to where we are now. And that's it. Yeah, it's interesting that it's going, because this will play out definitely in the hearings, because it was through the GCP spatial plan hearings, even though it was not part of us, what we were actually deciding, but it is interesting to see where this will end up actually through the RPS process.
Yeah, and we are just signalling kind of things that we support as not here's our evidence to suggest otherwise. It's just like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. It should kind of flow through that, and that we will get that evidence in that Section 32 report as part of that proposed RPS towards the end of the year, where that discussion around how you do it and all those things should come through, and we can have a more conversation on that once that's out as well.
Yes, I think supporting 24 hours is a no-brainer, but allowing people to live under the 50 dB, perhaps with a no plug complaints covenant about outdoor noise, it would be the sensible thing. Otherwise, we'll just end up with the army firing range again. Right, moving on.
So the next one I wanted to have a chat with you about is EIT INF P6, on-site wastewater systems. In that, as drafted, the policy would essentially prevent the establishment of a dwelling on any of our existing bare but urban zoned sites in our townships without a reticulated sewer. And we thought that at the staff level, we thought that was a little bit harsh.
Um. Thank you. I've got a question on this one. And I guess I note that you're adding the words at least. With regards to the suggestion on page 6 with regards to on-site sewage systems, and at least, it's not certain. What does at least mean? Does it mean 1 hectare, which we currently have in our zoning, through to the 4 hectare? Because at the moment, under our district plan, if you've got 8 hectares, you can subdivide down to 1 hectare and place a covenant on the rest of the land. So you're actually creating a whole lot of 1 hectare lots and amongst the 4 hectare lots. And the way that obviously this was written, the 1 hectare lots would also be caught by the fact that they're under the 4 hectare with regards to also these townships, because they don't have reticulated sewage. So what you're talking about is actually an averaging. I guess it's an averaging. We used to actually have 4 hectares, used to be quite clearly 4 hectares. You could not subdivide and use the outer plane rule of the 5,000 as it was then, or 1 hectare, and covenant the rest of the land with a no build. And that's crept into the 4 hectares. So what you've got is essentially a lot of 1 hectare blocks, with the remaining 3 hectares covenant that the rest of it will have a no build. So you've got an averaging. And that, with regards to servicing, is going to be an issue the way that this is actually written. But to use the word at least is uncertain as to what you're meaning. So when you're looking at the definitions, you have to actually provide certainty so people who read understand what is meant. So if you mean between 1 hectare and 4 hectares, put down the 1 hectare and 4 hectares, but just to use a word at least with no definition is just it's not good planning.
So if you read the whole of that sentence, it's about the area has a minimum site size of at least 4 hectares,
Yes.
not the site has a minimum area of at least 4 hectares. So where we've done, for example, where we've done an open space subdivision to create a 1 hectare and a 7 hectare, it would still be okay because it's in an area that has a minimum site size of at least 4 hectares. And we're deliberately suggesting not using the word zone, because in our general rural zone, we do have areas with a minimum site size of 800 square meters. And we don't want someone in an area that's in one of those areas, for example, using, oh, but the zone has an site area of 4 hectares, just not in my particular spot, as a justification to get through this policy.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically you've thought about all the arguments of people trying to get through.
Yeah, so we could potentially word it in terms of has an area of 4 hectares or greater, rather than at least 4 hectares.
Yeah.
But it's about the vicinity of the site and what provisions apply to that.
Okay.
That general area.
Yeah, it's important to have that clarity, because as soon as you use words at least, that's how we ended up with the 4 hectares being able to use the outer plains ruling.
Oh, absolutely. And as drafted, they were saying exactly 4 hectares. So if you had a site in an area with 40 hectare minimum site size, you couldn't use the policy, which is somewhat counterintuitive.
Councillor Miller.
Wondering, is it as easy to solve as changing the last word on paragraph A from and to or? Up on the screen, you're saying the site has a rural area or rural residential area that is a minimum size of 4 hectares and is demonstrationally. Could you take the and out and put or there? So it would cover that if it's demonstrably impractical because there's no reticulated sewage. Does that make sense, or is that not planning speak?
Yeah, this one needs to be redrafted to pick up the issues with the towns that we have that are not on reticulation, to differentiate that to the rural areas that don't have reticulation. And so that's what we're trying to clarify, that they may be limiting growth in those towns that require reticulation, but we say no, you need to allow those towns to be serviced based on what's currently zoned there, but not that. Yeah, but then they have a separate process for the rural stuff that's there. So that's what we're trying to get there.
And the reverse is true. I know you talk about Kirwee and Darfield. I wouldn't support one more septic tank going into Kirwee and Darfield when we just built a brand new pipeline. I think we should be really making people connect, and that's the incentive. You've got to get the pipes in the ground to get on if you want to build a house in Darfield. Like an issue of one more consent would be one too many as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, so that works for those townships that are getting that, but the towns that don't have it, it's kind of signaling that we wouldn't be even looking to expand those towns without reticulation because of the impact and the effect of that as well. So that's also kind of tied up in this policy as well.
I hear what you're saying. I support what you're saying. I think
finding that balance
it's
between
sort of defining which ones are reticulated, which ones are unreticulated, and clarifying them.
Councillor Mugford.
Yes, just where you've got amend to provide an exemption, couldn't that be made easier that they be of right, the ones that are in that at the time, rather than people having to go through and get exemptions? Why shouldn't they have the right at the time to do it?
Grandparenting.
Yeah, I think we've identified something in there saying that, whether it's zoned this at this date, so that the land that we've already identified that should be supported, carries on like that, but any new stuff is impacted by this policy.
Yeah, but the land that you've already got there shouldn't need an exemption. It should be in there anyway.
Yeah, the wording of the exemption will be in that policy rather than them have to apply for that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
about exemptions that would then lead, for example, could lead through to an updated land and water plan that made a permitted activity status, if that's where it landed.
What's the next one?
Okay, move on.
Moving on.
Doing great.
So there were two bits that came up in conversation around flood risk. So if you're following along in Diligent, this is HAZNHP2. Gotta love their numbering system. So the first part is talking about for high importance buildings, which they define as basically places where people sleep, moving from a 200-year flood event to a 500-year flood event with a 300mm floor height above that. For almost all of the district, that would result in a vertical change of about 5 centimetres or less. To which the building team went, yeah, whatever. The biggest bit, or the biggest potential vertical change, would be the definition of floor height, which for a concrete slab foundation is the bit on which you walk. And for a timber foundation is the bottom of the joist. So that's another 150mm before you get to the bit on which you walk. The definition actually isn't particularly changing from what's in the current RPS, but nobody uses the actual definition that's in the current RPS. Everybody uses floor height as the bit on which you walk.
Yeah.
So hence the suggestion that actually we should just define it as the bit on which you walk, and consider whether at a 500-year flood level, the expected life expectancy of a house, and the conservatism that is already built into the models when we build the models, is that actually a risk that we're willing to accept? Most of our buildings are concrete slab. So we're talking about very few buildings that actually are wooden floors in the first place in our district. It's a really conservative model. We're talking about a 500-year event in a building with a realistic life expectancy of maybe 100 years. Could we be okay with saying, actually, your floor might get wet?
So that, yeah, the change from 200 to 500 sounds big, but the actual impact of the flooding there, not as extreme though, but whether this is the right approach to flooding or not is probably just to get your steer on that, or what's been outlined there.
Okay, we're not going to need stilts. Deborah.
I couldn't see it in this, but I know that it's an issue for the rural community with regards to pole sheds, pole barns, having to actually meet the conditions of having a floor height.
This would do away with that.
Right,
Because
so
so that the draft RPS defines high importance buildings as basically places where people sleep and schools and council buildings and like post-emergency stuff. And then a moderate importance building is everything that is not a high importance building and not things that don't have built-in floors and sort of the rural farm building-y stuff that
yes, that's
actually
being,
we don't care if they get a bit wet.
well, that's what's being caught at the moment. And
To
right,
So that's a solution.
rebalance that.
Great.
okay, that's a positive because
Yeah,
I-
that's
yeah, I
fine.
looked at it and went,
We'll
actually,
keep
that's a
moving on. Nicole?
I have a bit of an objection to the reasoning with predominance of concrete foundations in new builds. Going forward, theoretically, I mean, this is a model that people are doing now. What has been in the past was actually quite common, and I grew up in a house that was like that, to have wooden floors that are built up. We listened to the Parliamentary Commissioner of the Environment who came and saw us. We should be looking more at that model again, as opposed to having the concrete foundations that we're doing, so that we are lighter on the land. And so I'm not sure we'd but even with having the concrete foundations and having it's no easy feat when your house is flooded to sort it out, and that's what we've seen elsewhere. So I think that we're actually better to go for the higher heights, considering that things could be worse than what we expect going forward.
Thank you for your input. Got that? Carry on, please.
And then the second part of the flood stuff that we had some conversations around were about camping grounds. And we've just suggested to ECAN that we need a different approach for camping grounds than they've suggested. Thank you very much.
Thanks for pointing that out. Sophie?
Yeah, I got that impression when they came to, it was like, oh, people sleeping if you want them to die. I don't know, is it worth suggesting something like, you know, a variation in what's applied, you know, if it's a manned site, you know, or
it might be that the proposed 2.C, so 2.B is requiring that new campgrounds be located outside our district, or requiring that risk to life is reduced to an equivalent level by similar means.
Yeah.
So that does provide a pathway for,
because
for example, summer only
yeah.
camping, or
Yeah, when there's a risk, we already preemptively close the risky campsites. Then there's the commercial ones that have somebody on site who can go around and go, hey, there's an alert, get out of here.
So I'm not sure. I'm not convinced that they've got the balance right at the minute, but there is at least recognition that you can do alternate pathways to get to the outcome that you're after.
Shane?
Just quickly, is there any risk to council for houses that have been built, wooden houses, floor heights at the joist height, at the differential floor heights, if that floor got wet and needed to be repaired through insurance, is there any risk to council?
I don't know.
We'll have to go back to what the current rules were
Mhm.
at the time
At
that
the
they
time.
did, and whether we followed that correctly or not, rather than whether the future rules then retroactively apply. They won't have that retroactive apply. It will just apply to those new builds after that. Yeah.
Okay, next.
We've got this one and then we've got your sheds. So this was our comments on the ECAN criteria for mapping HPL. I have just chucked in there the relevant clauses of the MPS HPL that ECAN used, or that ECAN were responding to when they were doing their mapping. So we've noted that the criteria should consider access to water, as there is an interrelationship between the productivity of the soil and the ability to water it.
Great wording.
Thank you, Ben.
You can amend it now, please.
It's Grant's point. Well done.
It's written. Sorry, how it's written is my bad.
Okay.
I might change it to irrigate. And that the criteria should consider current sizes of farming units and market gardens when limiting the size of highly productive land, which would add to the consideration of at least 5 hectares for a soil mapping unit and 2 hectares for primary parcels. In terms of the stuff smaller than that, ECAN removed from their mapping. Have we accurately captured your thoughts on those?
Deborah.
My question is, where do you sit with the 4 hectare blocks of land if you're talking 5 hectare and given that 4 hectares and above is a farming unit? So you've got a discrepancy there that doesn't match up with, you've got 5 hectares.
This is talking about when they were so what they did was they went through and took all of the class 1, 2, 3 land across the region, removed the land that was zoned urban, then removed chunks of land that were 5 hectares or less, then 5 hectares of class 1 or class 1 equivalent or less. Then they went through and removed the parcels that were 2 hectares in area or less. And then of what was left, where there were chunks of 150 hectares or more, they kept it.
Okay, so my questions.
So then when we get to is 4 hectares still the right number for us when it comes to doing subdivision in our rural area of HPL?
Yeah.
That is a question that we will need to consider through a plan change. Once the RPS process has been gone through,
Right.
we are required to do a plan change to implement the HPL provisions at the district level, and that will be the appropriate time to ask that question about, is 4 hectares still the right number, or does it need to be a different number?
Right, okay.
Any more comments? There being none, let's.
I'm just
where's
just
the-
on that, because what would happen to those 4 hectare blocks then? That were, because we have 4 hectare blocks as being our minimum.
We do.
On that.
If we were to decide that 2 hectares was the appropriate number,
Then it's not a problem. I
Then
mean,
it's not a
above,
problem.
But above.
if
4
we
is what
were
I
to
meant.
decide that actually 6 or 10 or some other number was the appropriate number, then we would do the same as what we did when we converted part of the outer plains to West Plains, and we went from 20 hectares to 40. It's a painful conversation, but it's a conversation that we will need to have with our community.
Yeah, this just trying
Which
to
is,
distinguish between highly productive land and rural land as well. So this is just looking at the highly productive. We're trying to define what highly productive means.
Yeah,
versus
yeah,
what is a rural productive unit? They're kind of
I-
two different things, but similar.
I realise that, but a questions around like where the 5 hectares come from. Are we saying that like we're an outlier as a district that we've got 4 hectares as being the minimum?
No, we're not.
So what are others saying about this? Because it will have, and that's why I asked the question, because it will have quite big ramifications on trying to,
It's just
you know,
it's just to bring
implement
together. It's just trying to clump together the land use capability classification. So if you have like 4 hectares of class 1, but not, then it would, okay, that will join up the bits that are 5 hectares or more of the class 1 and the relevant weighting of class 2s and 3s together. It's not looking at the sites at that point to say, well, this site has 4 hectares, therefore it's not productive. It's looking at it as areas of
At
what
that,
is productive.
at that point,
Okay.
it's just looking at the dirt.
okay.
Yeah, we're not worrying about sites yet.
Sorry. My concern is, and this often is what happens when you've got sort of like a large farm with class 1 and class 2 soils that is in the inner plains. They have an expectation that, you know, they can go down to 4 hectares. Or they're averaging. With regards to this particular proposal under the, you know, I mean, will they get in and actually undertake the 4 hectares before this becomes adopted? Therefore, you're actually encouraging a lot of 4 hectare subdivisions. How's that going to be managed?
The MPS HPL has an interim definition of highly productive land, and this is clarifying that beyond that ECAN has to do as part of the MPS HPL. So those sites, if they are class 1 and 2, that is defined as a highly productive land at present because of the MPS said all 1, 2, and 3 is classified. So if people came in that situation now, they would have to address the HPL considerations in there already. This here starts to clarify it's not just all of 1, 2, and 3 everywhere in the district. It tries to find the bits that are cohesive units of 1, 2, and 3 so that you can protect that rather than just little.
Yeah, so it's a step along the pathway, and we'll have to deal with it when it comes. Okay, I'm all ears.
Sheds.
Really want to hear your guys' opinion on this one.
Well, I'll open the betting. I think we've been very fortunate not to be in the issue. I live in a property where I've got 20,000 cars a day putting particulates over my front fence and into my bedroom window. I'd rather see that dealt with than restraints on people's ability to heat their houses and supply their own firewood. So I don't support an air shed myself, but opening the floor to Cole.
And this is where I come in because I disagree. And I cannot understand why we haven't been identified as being an air shed lot earlier, to be perfectly honest. But I have an air quality background working at the Auckland Regional Council, but Christchurch or ECAN, I should say, has had for quite some time having these air sheds. And I think it's about time Sophie's brought this up as well, is on a clear night when you've got the inversion layer, there is definitely you can smell the fires, and we shouldn't be getting that. We don't have the limitations on the fires that we do just quite close to where we are in Christchurch. And I think there's something that should be implemented out here as well.
Thank you for input. You can still smell the fires in Christchurch and they've got an air shed. Moving on, Grant.
Don't support it. Trying to fix something that's not broken.
Toby.
From where I'm, yeah, from my place, it is broken. So I'm with Nicole, to be honest. If I go outside even for 5 minutes on a winter's night, I come in stinking of smoke. That could just be, to me, it's worth even just asking them to investigate it. They may not find enough, but there is literally not a single ECAN air monitoring station in the whole district. So we don't actually know how bad that is. So how can we can't quantify our opinions here because we actually don't know. We don't have the data, and neither do they. But it certainly in this older portion of Rolleston, it does create health issues. So yeah, and we're also close to State Highway 1 and I-Zone, so that doesn't mean it's across the entire district. But again, that's why we need the data.
Thank you for your input. Go for a drive up to Mount Hutt and look down on the townships. It gives you an idea. Deborah.
I'm going to put forth for the rural community, many of our townships bound rural activities in which burn-offs are permitted with permits. And then you've got external fires that are allowed to be lit. And it's where we live. It comes back to reverse sensitivity issues. And
No, I don't know.
it's another coffin, a nail in the coffin for people trying to actually farm up against an urban environment. And that will no doubt cause problems with regards to, say, a city perspective on a provincial or semi-urban perspective. And that's where I can see the conflict coming in. And until that issue is resolved with clarity, I'm not supporting this either.
This is, sorry, I want to have another, I'm not having another go about the same thing, but it's bringing up with what Sophie said about the air quality monitor. We were supposed to have had one installed. If we can actually find out from ECAM what's actually happening about that, to get the information as to what is happening here. We were supposed to be having one in Rolleston, like Rangiura's got one and such. It's been way behind time that we should have had one here. And where we're talking about putting this sort of stuff in, Sophie's right. I mean, this is going to get passed before we've even got data about what's actually happening here.
Okay, point. That reinforces my point. So Lydia.
I just want to understand a little bit more, like the implications that it's actually going to have on our rural communities. Like Deborah was sort of pointing out, I sit in a real hard space because I can understand in the urban environment where you've got a lot of fires, but I also want to understand how that might actually affect outside of our urban environments.
Yeah, I think the air quality stuff in the city only applies to the urban stuff or stuff that's less than a hectare or two. So it wouldn't be if there were
The likes of Darfield, for instance.
Yeah, so it would probably depend where the data is and where they if you did some research and monitored and you found that there was something that we exceeded and we would have to require an airshed, then you'd have to probably start to define the area of the airshed and what elements were impacted within that, and then you'd have to start figuring out what provisions you'd put in place so that, like in the city, you've got different airshed zones, and they have then essentially just required ultra low emission burners and other things within those areas to control that. So yeah, before you'd even you'd have to figure that out. But for the Darfield urban area, if that was monitored and found that it exceeded the targets that were set, then there would have to be an airshed put in place and those mitigation things underway. So, and you'd say here it covers this area here, or the urban areas within this area here, and within that you have to put in ultra low burners rather than regular burners. But it may, likely won't apply to just general rural people, but it'll be those urban ones. Probably.
Yeah.
That's how you follow the airshed through.
I know this is a policy, not a rule.
Yeah.
And any subsequent rules identifying airsheds and then the rules that applied within those airsheds would be subject to a Schedule 1 RMA process to get them into the relevant air plan or whatever the
Yeah.
eventual plan is.
You finished?
Currently, it's my understanding that if you have a lot in the rural area and it's, sorry,
Excuse me, Sophie's next up.
I think we're kind of highlighting here that actually, because Selwyn doesn't have an airshed at the moment, not everybody actually knows what the airsheds are. So just for clarity, you can see them on Canterbury maps. At the moment, the Christchurch one covers Christchurch, Rangiora and Kaiapoi. There is no airshed that covers the rural areas north or to the west of there. There's another airshed that covers Ashburton, just the township. There's another one for Geraldine and one for Timaru. And I think Waimate got one. No. So it's not, it doesn't actually, the current ones that they have don't extend out into the rural areas. They have different rules around outdoor burning at certain times of the year and all that sort of stuff. This is pretty much, this is a request from my point of view that some of our urban areas get at least some monitoring and assessed for whether or not that sort of rule is applicable for probably Rolleston and Lincoln, and that's probably about it. But yeah, it's not certainly not asking that they change the rules and stop people who live in areas where electricity could be cut off and you need a wood burner. Yes, you do. But in the middle of Raleigh, that's not necessarily appropriate. We don't have the same arguments as to how we heat our homes.
But yeah, and then we're going to wrap up.
Sorry, I guess it's like, and the question around it was just that when we're talking Selwyn, I'm thinking Selwyn as a whole, I'm not thinking just Rolleston or Lincoln and Prebbleton. And I understand that's where the concerns lie.
Grant?
Question of clarity. So there's still, we got anything in here now, we need to say right now, because we're going to wind up. But not just the airshed.
Because this
This is our feedback. In this stage, we've got the proposed RPS that will come out at the end of the year where we can also.
No, I mean, if you finish your list, because one of the things I brought up that hasn't been put in there was around regionally significant infrastructure, and community irrigation is not included in that. And we regard food and fibre production in Canterbury as regionally significant. So
yeah, so that's the last one of the list of ones to go through, but we can talk about the regional infrastructure if everyone's finished with the airshed element. That's all right, and the concerns around there.
I have a comment to finish
Yeah.
off, but we've got to keep moving here. We're running out.
So on the airshed, we need to finish that one. Yep.
Airshed, I'd just like to point out that the research previously had been that with an onshore wind at night, as was what happens, the Christchurch pollution blows over us, and as the sun comes up, and the offshore starts to blow, it pushes back over Christchurch, and that has been what has happened in the past. And I would like to say that the ability to have a log burner in Rolleston has been a major point in attracting people to this area, so do keep that in mind. Carry on, Ben, we have a couple of minutes now.
Yeah, so I think we've covered the bits that we pointed out there. So yeah, just Grant want to talk to community infrastructure and we'll find what we put in there. I think the current draft one had a specific policy for community infrastructure that was similar, had similar protections as the regional ones, but I think they were just trying to clarify what ones kind of cover across TA boundaries versus what things may sit within it. Would that be fair?
yeah, and from my conversations with the staff who did the drafting, they were looking at regionally significant infrastructure as stuff people need to live, as opposed to necessarily stuff people need to successfully run a business and manage their stock and that kind of thing.
to live, you need food to eat.
I'm not disagreeing with you. That was their thinking.
So their definition is wrong, and I would hope that we would support
If
that.
you'd like to email some stuff through, and we can certainly make sure that we've got it updated before the council meeting next week.
So is the issue with the separation of the two policies, or? Yes.
This was always identified as regionally significant before in the old RPS. Being downgraded to community scale changes the roles and responsibilities and rights that you are able to do. And I think it's important that, as particularly on really disaster recovery, you want to be regarded as regionally significant, not community scale. Because when you have a major disaster like the Alpine fault, you want to make sure that you're at the front of the queue getting going.
Great. I think we need to perhaps take that conversation offline. We are running short of time. We're going to call an end to the session. Lydia, is it?
Oh, look, I support it going to regionally significant, but I've given you that feedback already, so.
Right, folks, we've condensed the morning. We're going to have a quick lunch. We're coming back here at 1:15, and we'll carry on with